What are optical illusions? Optical illusions are shortcuts that human brains take in order to get from one place to another without getting overwhelmed. There's only so much information the human brain can take in at one time, so these types of shortcuts can be incredibly useful. Illusions are what happens when the shortcuts don't necessarily match reality. It's probably a good thing that we take these shortcuts. Imagine what would happen if we didn't have shortcuts like this. Everything would be overwhelming and chaotic. That said, shortcuts aren't always a good thing. Humans are good at pattern recognition, good at seeing things where they are and sometimes where they aren't always. This can lead to things like stereotyping, which isn't necessarily a good thing. With that being said, we're focusing today on optical illusions. So there's a really good website that has a bunch of them. michaelbach.de/ot, created by the titular Michael Bach. This has a lot of optical illusions, everything from colors to movements to shapes to angles. But today I'm going to be focusing on the leaning tower illusion. You start with a single tower, like the one shown here, and then you duplicate it and move it over. Now it looks like one tower, the one that was formerly straight, is leaning a little. That seems to be strange, so the question here is, why does this happen? Why does one tower end up looking like it's leaning off to the side? Well, this is simple if you know what you're looking for. It has to do with something called vanishing points and perspective. If you're an artist or are familiar with photography, this is probably almost painfully familiar. Vanishing points and perspective lines are a very common topic in those fields. So with that in mind, let me discuss what those are. In a picture, you have lines. Even if you don't usually think of lines being something fundamental to what you're looking at, your scenery will trail off into the distance, and your vanishing point is where all of those lines sort of originate. It might be weird to think about it like that, but let me just demonstrate real quick. Here's the original picture of the Leaning Tower. You can see that its perspective lines, its vanishing point, goes up into the distance. The original building that was not removed and replaced with an identical copy of the Leaning Tower has the exact same vanishing point as the tower. You can trace the lines of the building up. It's easy with buildings because, well, easy-ish with buildings, because they have very clear lines. They're all going to the same location. So why is it weird when we have the Leaning Tower? It's because when you take the tower and copy it to the side, the vanishing point doesn't go to the same point anymore. It's translated to the side. It moves. So you can see that the buildings now have two separate vanishing points. Instead of being the same vanishing point as we saw before, it's two different ones. So how does this illusion affect real life? Well, there's two things. If you were looking at a building at an odd angle, then you might think a building is less safe. If you are doing art, this is going to affect you a lot. This illusion is uncommon in real life because in real life, most things are going to have a consistent vanishing point. If you see two buildings that are next to each other that have different vanishing points, it is likely that one is leaning. This isn't always 100% the case, although usually you have to be looking at it in an odd angle. The people who are going to be most affected by this are going to be artists or photographers who have to keep in mind vanishing points when they're drawing, or else their buildings might look strange or warped. Or people who are doing architecture have to understand why buildings lean or warp and why they might look strange in pictures. Now, how does this affect human behavior? People might assume that some buildings are dangerous or that some artists are bad when this is not necessarily the case. Maybe an artist had trouble with this specific vanishing point because in big cities it can be hard to tell or confusing to see when a specific building has a different vanishing point, or maybe if you're looking at a building from an odd angle and your vanishing point seems to be strange, you might just have trouble. A building might just look different from certain angles. Again, it's hard to see this one in real life because usually you're not going to end up with a totally different vanishing point on two buildings, but it is important to keep in mind if you're doing art or if you're doing math, because angles like this are incredibly important. But yeah, that is how the Leaning Tower illusion works, and that is how it can affect people. I think it's a really interesting illusion because it has so much to do with vanishing points and how we perceive things, being that if you look and trace these lines, you can follow them into the horizon. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great